Welcome to Math, ACT Prep. We're looking at page 380, 1 through 6. You were given 6 minutes to do 6 problems. And now we're going to go over the solutions. We're going to go over the math as well as shortcuts that we can take when possible. So first of all, going through the math. The slope of the line. Well, slope is change in y, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It's the definition of slope. Okay, so if it doesn't matter which direction we go, as long as we're consistent, let's go from the second point, the one on the right, to the one on the left. That means the change in y, subtract the y coordinates, that's 0 minus 3, divided by the change in x, which is 6 minus 0. So 0 minus 3 is negative 3, 6 minus 0 is just 6, and negative 3 over 6 reduces to the fraction negative 1/2, which is choice C. Okay, a couple of things. If you forgot the slope formula, how could you have gotten this answer? Well, number one, is the slope going down from left to right? We know it has to be negative because it's going down from left to right. And since you know the slope should be negative, that could eliminate these two answers right away. So even if you needed to guess, you could at least reduce this to a choice of 3. Okay, now, slope is rise over run. Most people remember that. So to go from the left point to the right point, I have to go down and right. Well, how far did you go down? Well, we went down 3, and we went right 6. Well, down is a negative direction. 6 is right is a positive direction. That gives you the same negative 3 over 6 as we got here, which brings us to the same negative 1/2. So that's the slope. Number 2, not as easy to do. However, we have to look at this dotted line, and when we have an inequality in a dotted line, that means it's a less than or a greater than, but not a less than or equal to or a greater than or equal to. Since none of the answer choices have an equal sign, we can't eliminate one really quickly. Okay, so let's look at the line, the dotted line. Remember, a linear equation is in the form y equals mx plus b, where b is the y-intercept and m is the slope. So let's look at the slope. Take any points that I can see well, which is, of course, this y-intercept, which is negative 3. And then I look at this point right here, which is easy to read off. And to go from one point to another, I go up 1 over 1, 2, 3, 4. That means the slope is 1 over 4. So the dotted line has the equation 1/4 x, that's a 4, not a 9, 1/4 x minus 3. Since the inequality shading is below this line, that means the inequality representing this is y is less than 1/4 x minus 3. However, this does not look like any of our answers. So to make it look like our answers, we have to do a little about algebra. Whenever we have an equation or an inequality with fractions, to get rid of fractions, we can divide it or multiply. We can multiply everything by the denominator. Since the denominator is 4, we're going to multiply everything by 4. 4 times y is 4y. 4 times 1/4, that's why we're doing this, is simply 1x. And then 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. Okay, still doesn't look exactly like the answers. However, we see that we have a 1x at this point, and a 4y, and a 12. This answer choice has a 4x, a 1y, and a 3, negative 3. So we could eliminate that answer at this point. Secondly, we need to make it look like this. In other words, the x term first, then the y term, then the inequality, and then the 12. Well, since the y is already in the right spot, and the 12 is already in the right spot, let's start off by subtracting x from both sides and keep the x where it it's supposed to be. Negative x plus 4y less than negative 12. Okay, still doesn't look exactly like the answers. We need the x to be a positive term. So to do that, we'll multiply everything by negative 1. Negative 1 times negative x is positive x. Negative times positive is negative, so it's a negative 4y. And that's a positive 12, because negative 1 times negative 12 is positive 12. However, remember, if you multiply an inequality by a negative, you have to change the direction, which makes this the final inequality. It looks like choice F. No real good, easy shortcut for that problem. Okay, number 3. We read the problem, we're looking at the graph. We see that we wanted the cost of 1 linear foot of wood. The graph gives us the cost of installation for each linear foot in increments of 5. The cost is in increments of 25. Now it says 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, and so on. So if we look at the y-intercept, this represents the amount of wood at 0 wood. In other words, if no wood were used, we still have a $150 cost. All right, so this represents the installation fee. That's this flat installation fee. It has to be $150. All right, so to get 1 linear foot of wood, we can't see that directly, so let's take something we can see. To keeping the numbers small, I see that 5, right here, this point, if I go over 5, I go up. That's $225. That means it costs $225 for the fence if it's 5 linear feet. Well, remember that $225 includes the $150 flat installation fee. So if we subtract that off, that's $75. So now we know it's $75 for 5 linear feet. Well, if it's $75 for 5 linear feet, then 75 divided by 5, which is $15 per foot, which gives us answer choice C. Could we have gotten this a little bit easier? Well, remember, the cost has to be the slope. So if I just went anywhere, what's the slope of the line? From any point to any point. So if I go from this point here to this point that we've already marked, how far do we have to go up? We have to go 25, 50, 75. So it's up 75, right 5. And that brings us to the same 75 over 5 that we had here, which reduces to 15. Okay, this one, number 4. Number 4 has a little bit more to it, but we can also look at a shortcut. But let's do the math first. The length of a segment. The length of a segment is given by the distance formula, and the distance between any 2 points is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, so let's look at this. Picking points, square root. Let's take 3, go from this point to this point, 3 minus negative 2. Well, 3 minus negative 2, that's squared, plus negative 6 minus 6 squared. That leaves us with 3 minus negative 2, which is 5 squared, plus negative 6 minus 6 is 12, is negative 12 squared. This leaves us with the square root of 25 plus 144, which is equal to the square root of 169. And then a calculator will tell us that the square root of 169 is 13. Okay. All right. Let's say you forgot the distance formula. How could we have gotten this answer a lot simpler? Well, you are given graph paper, and anytime you're talking about points, use your graph paper. So let's look at the points 3, -6, and -2, 6. If we looked at a piece of graph paper and plotted 3, -6, that's 3, -6. There's my 3, -6. And the other point was -2, 6. So -2 up 6. Here's my -2, 6. All right, so basically it's asking what's the length of this line? Okay, well, let's look at our answer choices. We have 1, 5, 10, 12, and 13. Well, if we did nothing else and didn't know the distance formula and weren't able to calculate that 13, we can just look at this and just say, well, how far up is it? Well, if I just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The distance straight up is 12 units. That distance is 12. Well, if this is 12, then this angled line has to be more than 12. So if you were just able to get this and say, well, straight up is 12, that means the length of this has to be more than 12. There's only one answer choice that's more than 12. So even if the answer choices were 10, 12, 13, 15, or something like that, you could obviously eliminate all the answers 12 and below right off the bat. Okay, similarly, number 5. We're going to do this one as well, do the math first, and then we will look at a shortcut to help us get through a problem like this. It says given point A is -3, -8, and the midpoint is 1, -5. Well, midpoint formula is, remember, we take the sum of each coordinates and divide by 2. Midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. That's the x-coordinate. And the y-coordinate is y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So this is how we find the midpoints. Now, in this case, we have the midpoint and one endpoint. So we know that the midpoint for the x-coordinate of the midpoint is 1. That means 1 has to equal x1, which is my -3, plus my x2, which we don't know because we need the other endpoint, over 2. Well, if I multiply both sides by 2, I get 2 is equal to -3 plus x2. Add 3 to both sides. Plus 3, we get 5 is equal to x2. So that means the x-coordinate of my endpoint is 5, and at this point we see that there's only one answer choice that has 5 as an x-coordinate. So that has to be correct. But again, just to make sure we understand the math, the y-coordinate of the midpoint is -5, and that has to be the y-coordinate, -8, plus y2 over 2. Multiply both sides by 2 again, you get -2 is equal to -8 plus y2. Add 8 to both sides, and of course y2 is -2, just as we expected it to be, so that's true. But again, we're talking about the length of a segment and its midpoint. So let's just look at a little bit of common sense. Let's say you completely forgot how to use the midpoint formula. Well, let's plot the 2 points that we have. We know an endpoint is -3, -8. So look at a piece of graph, -3, -8 is right here. The midpoint is given as 1, -5. So I'm going to go 1, -5, which is right there. Okay, so remember, this is the midpoint of a line segment. Well, if this is the end and this is the middle, then the line, that has to be halfway, which means the other half has to be somewhere around here. All right, if this is the midpoint, just double this line. Okay, look at the answer choices. Well, look at E, for example. -1, -1.5. That would be up here somewhere. Sorry, that -1, -1.5 would be around here somewhere. Not even close to where it should be. So E is obviously wrong. D says -2, -2. Well, -2, -2 is about here. Well, that makes no sense for an endpoint. C says -1, -6.5. Again, -1, -6.5 would be around here. That makes no sense for an endpoint either. So looking at the last two choices, of course we know the answer is A, but 5, -2, 4, -2, 4, -2 is here, and 5, -2 is here. If we just draw the line, we see that how do we get to the midpoint? Well, we had to go up 1, 2, 3 over 1, 2, 3, 4. So we went up 3 over 4. Well, if this is the midpoint, I should have to do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's this point, which is 5, -2. So just a little common sense, if we draw a graph, you have graph paper, we know an endpoint and a midpoint. Midpoint has to be halfway, draw the rest of the line, has to be around there. Even with an inaccurate graph, you would have been able to eliminate 3 of these answers and still would have made a choice between A and B. But if you drew it very accurately, you would easily see that A is the correct answer. Number 6, last one. Area of the sector. Okay, well, first of all, area of the sector, you have to do, well, doing the math first, we have to know that whenever we have a graph, though, we can expect the graph to be to scale. All right, now let's first of all, the area of a circle is pi r squared. That's just one of those formulas you should know. But look at this. Notice that this line is not in the center. Okay, the origin of the graph is not in the center. More of it's on this side. So let's see, how far across is this? Well, if I go from one end to the other, from here I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So the diameter is equal to 12, which means the radius is half that, 6. But notice that I got 6, counted to 6 right there. Okay, so we want the area of the shaded region, which is sector area. So let's look at what we have. First of all, the area of the entire circle is r squared, that's 6 squared times pi, which is 36 pi. Okay, so that's the area of the entire circle, so that can't be the area of the sector. Okay, now, sector, again, this is a portion of it. We're given a degree measure. So an entire circle is 360 degrees, and we want a portion that's only 60 degrees of that. So we have 60 of this 360 area. So the sector area only includes 60 degrees of the whole 360. So we want 60 360ths of this 36 pi. Okay, and that can be a calculator problem. And you don't even have to reduce your fractions first for the calculator. It doesn't care. You can take parentheses 60 divided by 360. Now I'm going to multiply by 36 and not the pi. Okay, do not put in the pi. When I hit that, I get 6. But we know we wanted to multiply this by pi, so in other words, I kind of ignored this for a second and did the 60 over 360 times 36, and we got 6. Now that's because the area of the sector is 6 pi, right? Because all the answers are in terms of pi, so that makes that the correct answer. Okay, if you forgot all that, if you forgot the areas of anything, well, one, you would have been able to count across and realize that the radius is 12. This is now the midpoint of the circle. That's the center of the circle. And if I just divide this circle into 4 parts, okay, then the area of the whole circle is 36 pi. The area of the shaded area isn't even 1/4 of that. Okay, it's certainly not half of it, it's not 3/4, it's less than 1/4. So if you just took 36 divided by 4 and say 9, That means if this whole quarter section would be 9 pi, okay, that would be 1/4 of the whole area, of the whole circle. So that means the answer has to be less than 9 pi because this shaded area is less than 1/4. And that still would eliminate these two answers at least. And your choice would have been between the 2, 6, and 9, 2, 6, and 8, even if you had a guess. Just realizing that this sector was less than 1/4 of the entire thing. So, little common sense. Geometric drawings on the ACT are to scale. So if it looks like less than 1/4, it's less than 1/4. That concludes the first 6 problems.